Welcome to the LabVIEW experiment. I'm your host, Sam Taggart from SAS Workshops. If you're a developer looking to unlock your potential and take your skills to the next level, then look no further. From freeing your imagination and experimenting with new ideas and workflows, to exploring aspects of software development you've never even considered before, I'm going to help you grow your craft so you can approach your work like an artist and have more fun with what you do. In my 15 years working with and training developers, I've helped dozens of individuals and organizations embrace a growth and learning mindset that allows us to overcome challenges and embrace failure as the essential learning experience it is. If you're ready for the philosophies, strategies, tips, and tricks that will unlock your creativity, then it's time to get to work. All right, so I am here today with Dave Thomson of Original Code Consulting. Dave has been in the LabVIEW community for quite a while. He's a LabVIEW champion. He's got his own little consulting company here. So welcome, Dave.
Thanks, Sam. Glad to be here.
Yeah, Dave is a very active member of our local alarm group, which stands for Advanced LabVIEW Architects of the Rocky Mountains.
Yep.
And don't let the title put you off. Not everybody is that advanced. We do have some advanced users, but everybody is welcome. And our topics range from all kinds of stuff. So there's a little something for everybody in that group. I really like in the Denver Golden area, the community that we have. I think it's really good. I feel like there's this spirit of collaboration.
Yeah, I've noticed that over the years. Again, trying not to get too negative, but I think there was a lot of that in the past, and I'm not feeling as much of it more currently, and that's probably partially due to the pandemic and partially due to the way the NI community is shaping up these days. But I do agree with your point in general, and I am really happy to have so many great people to collaborate with.
Well, I do want to say something positive, actually. So Tim Weiler, who is our NI guy, before they got rid of their local sales guy, actually did a very great job at bringing the community together. And he was definitely pulling a lot of strings there and introducing people and organizing meetings. And for a while, we had the meetings up in Louisville at the NI office, and that was good. And then that office just went away. So
yeah,
that was a loss. But we're still going. We've got a meeting later tonight. So
yeah,
hopefully that will go well. Yeah, I mean, aside from just the meetings, I feel like the spirit of collaboration, there's a whole bunch of one-man bands, as John Gianangeli would put it, right? All these little consulting companies that are like one, maybe two people. And I feel like there's not really this like competitive, cutthroat kind of thing. A lot of it is, it's very collaborative. Like you and I have talked about doing some jobs together, and I've worked with John and there's some other people around that I've done some work with. So
I think that's definitely true, and I really do appreciate that. I remember when I first started, Chris Clark was one of the ancient ones, and as far as a LabVIEW consultant, right? He got started practically before anybody nationwide, and he gave me my first lead. Mark Stengel was established before I got going, and I met with him and picked up tips from him, and so yeah, I've always felt like the local LabVIEW consultants, programmers were more collaborators than competitors. I think John Gianangeli even likes to call them, what is his term? I'll think of it.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. He has a specific term for this concept, but you're right. I mean, it's been going on, ever since I joined the community. That kind of atmosphere has really been strong here. So,
yeah, I remember I moved out here about 7 or 8 years ago, and I didn't know anybody when I moved out here, and people were very welcoming. But that was also like back in the time when Tim and I were way more involved than they currently are.
Yeah.
So.
It is definitely changing, and I think it's an unfortunate combination of the pandemic and NI's focus, new focus on how they want to do business, that have combined to kind of leave us floundering a little bit.
Yeah, I'm reminded I had I was listening to a webinar earlier today, and one of the comments was that like there are very few problems that can't be solved with better communication, and I think that's where NI falls very short. I think their communication is very poor, non-existent. And but I did got back from GDevCon over in Amsterdam, and I had some conversations with Eric, and it really helped to enlighten me a little bit. I understood a little bit of their thought process. I'm not saying I agree with it. I still think there's some issues with it, but at least it's a little bit better. And I feel like if they would have communicated that better, I feel like the whole thing with the subscription and all that, a lot of that was just more than anything the way it was presented, I think.
Well,
and there are some real issues with it too.
Right.
But
I can't disagree with you that the presentation fell flat, but I don't agree with the content either. So
yeah,
that's only part of it. And
no,
also, you're talking about how NI is really the communication is what they need to improve on. And I don't know. I'm probably going too far here, but I'm not sure that. I'm not sure I quite agree with the concept there, because I wonder if I suspect that they're doing something very specific that they've planned out and they think is a good idea, and it just doesn't involve communication with us. And that, that's their choice. And I'm not saying that's a wrong business decision for them. We're not happy about it. But I don't know that they're not communicating with us because they're making a mistake. I think maybe they're not communicating with us just because that's no longer their priority.
Huh. Well, I certainly hope you're not right. But there was a comment on one of the forums, something about like NI losing its connection to its end customers. And I think there is something about that relationship that has been fractured.
Well, definitely, as we see it.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if their customers is a different different group now, and they're probably I'm guessing that they're communicating just fine with their customers.
Well, so I'm kind of torn about some of these things because as a business owner, right, and you'll identify with this, there are customers that don't bring in a lot of revenue but require a lot of effort.
Oh, yeah.
And there are customers that bring in a lot of revenue. And so as a business, it makes sense to focus on the customers that show the most growth potential and are the easiest to work with. And I think for NI, that tends to be those larger customers that they have in their BUs, the
right
aerospace defense one and the other one. So I totally get that. I guess my concerns are mostly about like, how do we replenish the LabVIEW community? Because, those big companies don't start out as big companies. They start out as small companies and people screwing around, and the barrier to LabVIEW is kind of high. But in talking to Eric, I think they're going to do some stuff to lower that. So I think that's good. I mean, I think the subscription price is actually lower than what it would have been to buy existing perpetual license. So that's good for people who've never used LabVIEW. I think the part that caused some consternation was that if you're on the SSP, the price went up.
I haven't really examined the price structure enough to.
Yeah.
I imagine you're right, but
I know that was kind of the conversation I'd had with Eric. So, but anyway, I don't want to get too much into the details of that. But speaking of business and LabVIEW, I was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit about this product you have, Micus X, and more from the idea of like how you took an idea and you solved a problem on one project, and how did you then turn that into a product? Like, what was the thought process behind that?
Yeah, thanks. You really have to twist my arm hard to get me to talk about Micus X. So my favorite LabVIEW subject. But boy, it's a long story. 25 years ago, when LabVIEW was a lot younger, and we all were, it wasn't uncommon. People tried to make a product with LabVIEW, and some people succeeded, but in general, there were a lot of relatively lame efforts to make a universal data acquisition program that you could then sell, and that's a really tough thing to do. It's a tough nut to crack,
and everybody's trying to do it.
And it was kind of funny to see some of these things come out, and it just didn't really work for your situation or whatever. It really wasn't worth what the producer thought maybe it was, or there's all these different problems. It was just my experience early on with that kind of thing was that it would be really hard to create a product, to productize something in LabVIEW that's really just that generic. Obviously, you can there's plenty of people making LabVIEW products that hit a very specific target and do a very specific test or a toolkit that does something very specific. That's a little different. That's fine. That works if you have that niche.
So yeah, I think the challenge is, right, you can make something very specific, but then your market's really small.
Right.
You make it larger, then you can sell more, but at some point you get so large that everybody has their own specific needs, and then they end up going with the custom solution anyway, which is why people choose LabVIEW to begin with, because they want some kind of custom solution that they can't get off the shelf. Right?
There's a lot of that, but there's, I don't know the details of a lot of these companies, but there are companies out there that do the first thing, a very specific product, but then they hit a big market like automotive, and so that's one way. That's one way to crack the nut. What my approach was it evolved over literally decades and writing different applications for somewhat similar situations, which is to say usually custom scientific instrumentation. So, and you could feel yourself, oh man, I've written the data log before, I've written the error handler before, I've written the data acquisition engine before and the sequencer before. Why am I writing this all, every time? I sure you can scrape some of your code, but you're basically writing it over every time. Everybody needs an application. There's so much commonality between these applications. So I just started thinking about how to structure my next application in a way that was more configuration based, more modular, and more reusable. And there were actually, I can't remember, probably 3 or 4 iterations where I would start a new project and I would go in that direction, and I didn't get terribly far in that. And I ended up writing another custom program for that one project, right? But I learned some more about it and how to do it. And eventually, I just managed that one time. One of those efforts, I managed to take it to that next level where I really created more of a generic framework than a custom application. So that's what MicasX is. It's a highly configurable. Framework is probably not the right word from a strictly software definition point of view, but it has a lot of the same concepts. But it just allows a lot of code reuse. You can take the same code base and customize it to a lot of different applications. Certainly not every application. There's I would never claim that. We still do a lot of jobs where we just need a custom LabVIEW program. Micas doesn't fit at all. That happens. But there's a bunch of applications where it just really fits really well and gets you out the door and running, much quicker than if you were just going to start coding up yet another data logger.
Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of it was just trial and error and experimentation.
I did that a bunch of times, and got a little closer each time and kind of figured out what I needed to do to maybe make it work.
Cool. So if I think about like Actor Framework is kind of designed for like maximum flexibility in mind, and DQMH is designed to be accessible and for developer experience. What would you like if you had to describe MicasX in a few words? Like, what is the focus? Is it just code reuse, or is there more than that?
There's a couple of things. Code reuse is big. Getting an application going really fast is a big point. It hits a certain subset of applications, which are a little hard to describe because it's not a specific industry. So we've used it in scientific instruments. We've used it in mobile labs where you've got a dozen different commercial instruments that you want to bring together. We've used it in industrial settings for process automation, for quality control. So it's a little hard to define. This is my marketing challenge, and I haven't cracked the nut yet, because I don't want to pigeonhole it into one industry. And so it's hard for me to describe where this works. I know where it works, but it's really hard to convey that to a prospective customer. But it's the kind of application where you're doing a lot. You've got different sensors and actuators, and things kind of run at maybe 1 hertz. Maybe they run at 10 hertz, even 100 hertz. But typically, you've just got some process going along. You're measuring temperatures at 1 hertz or once a minute.
Yep.
Relatively slow stuff like that, where you want to sequence things. You got to turn valves, and you have alarms that go off at based on these conditions. And so all that kind of stuff is sort of built in, where we have a whole set, like 100 different drivers for different common hardware, and any driver just plugs into Micah's the same way. So a channel is a channel. Doesn't matter what driver it comes from. You can sequence off of that. You can alarm off of that. You can do all this stuff. So that's the idea. It works in those situations where you're not super fast timing, but more like process control or experiment control. And the other key aspect to it where it really works well is it's like an 80-20 solution. The sweet spot for it is when Micah's has like 80% of the project done and ready to go out of the box. And then it's my time to create the custom 20% that makes it work for this specific situation. And so that's what makes it a little bit hard to sell as a product on NI, LabVIEW Tools Network.
Yep.
It's just not quite an out-of-the-box thing. It's a little too complicated to just hand somebody, here, give me a few $1,000s. Here's your program. Go use it.
So it's a jump-started solution, right?
It's a jump start, but it's that window between custom and already done. And
customizable.
Yeah, it's definitely customizable. Yeah.
Yeah. So then when you sell that to customers, I assume you charge them like some fixed chunk for the Micah X itself, and then some add-on for all the customization.
Right. There's a fixed chunk for Micah. So then they can buy different drivers that we've already built, different modules we've already built for fixed prices. And then there's the custom modules for that particular instance, which there's almost always some, not always, but usually there's some piece of hardware that has never been in Micah's before. And so we develop that custom, and we only charge them for that once, no matter how many times they use it.
Yep.
And then there's our time to configure, test, get it running kind of stuff. So that's the final chunk.
The debugging and et cetera. Like final commissioning test or whatever.
Exactly.
It's cool.
Yeah.
So what are the other things that I know you for? Is I know back in the day you were very involved with the FIRST Robotics and with bringing up younger people. Yeah,
I've done some really fun things with LabVIEW. I've really had a blast with it over the years. Before we get to the first, I will mention we did have we had a BattleBot. We built a BattleBot that was sponsored by NI, and so we actually had a BattleBot with a PXI chassis in it. So it was a semi-smart bot. It was really fun, and I gave it to it. It helped us a ton with hardware. They actually helped us with. They gave us a C-reel to put in the next one. That's still under construction, so we'll see where that goes. But
that's cool.
It was a blast. But yeah, I used to help with FIRST Robotics, and that was kind of cool when LabVIEW was built into Lego Mindstorms, right? I was actually a beta tester for that first version of Mindstorm software that was LabVIEW based, and so that was a blast. And helped the kids, FIRST Robotics teams back in the day when to help them with that, and always tried to encourage STEM kind of ideas in not just my kids, but kids in the community and stuff. That's always been important to me. Haven't done that as much since my kids grew up and out of out of that age range. But yeah, I had a niece who was really big in FIRST and the not the Mindstorms, but the big FIRST in high school too. So she did great with that.
Is that Davida?
Yeah, that is actually.
Your intern.
Yeah. Yeah, she's amazing. She's student here at School of Mines right now, and she was going to go start when the pandemic hit, and decided that doing a year remote really wasn't that great a way to do your freshman year. So she interned for me from that summer through the next year and the next summer, and then I went to school for a year last year, and then interned again for this past summer. So that's just been fantastic. She picked up LabVIEW, just like that. But she already, programmed Arduinos and Python and these other things. And so she was a great resource for me whenever we hit something that I'm a LabVIEW guy, right? You know that. Yeah. I like LabVIEW so much. I've never bothered to learn all these other tools because I've kept busy enough. So, why bother? So, but then you're in this position where a lot of times you just need somebody who can do these other things. And so she did that for me for a couple of years, and it's just been fantastic.
That's cool. Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a generational thing too, because I think a lot of so you're several years older than me. I think a lot of people your age are like close enough to retirement that they're just hanging on to the LabVIEW and that's their niche. And I think a lot of the younger guys like me, my age and younger, we're kind of looking at what's going on with the NI, and we're just like, maybe we should start hedging our bets. And honestly, I think from a business point of view, I think it is good to hedge your bets a little bit and not put all your faith in one company. So
can't argue with that. I haven't followed that path, but I totally respect it. So I haven't needed to, but that doesn't mean it's not a good idea for someone else. So.
Well, I always go back to this idea of like T-shaped knowledge, where you're like really deep in one thing, and like LabVIEW is the thing that I know really well.
Yeah.
But the more other things that I know a little bit about, the wider I can expand. So like learning about databases and web services and SQL and JSON and all these things, and maybe a little Python. It just broadens the types of problems you can solve, I think.
Definitely. Even just within the LabVIEW world, there's always that. I mean, if you're not learning, you're moving backwards. So, every new project, there's some little bit of something, whether it's LabVIEW or some corner of LabVIEW you've never touched before, or some completely different language or technology. But you always got to learn something new. Yeah. And that's the fun part too.
LabVIEW has lots of corners.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's definitely, and then you get into real time and FPGA, and that's a whole other ball game. And I keep meaning to do more with that. And then part of my problem is I enjoy learning new things. I enjoy experimenting and tinkering, but it's hard to justify all the tinkering if I don't have a project to work on. So like I've got like Arduinos and Raspberry Pis sitting at home, and it's just like, I could do a little project. I've done like, the flash the LEDs or whatever, but really I need a project or somebody willing to pay me to like go learn about XYZ. Yeah,
it's a balancing act, because you need that project to pay you to do it before you can really afford to invest your time. But at the same time, you have to know enough about it that you can convince them to pay you, because you're already the expert.
Yeah. Or you even see the opportunity, right? Because sometimes you don't see the opportunity until you get in there. Like you start playing with something, you're like, oh, this would be really great for XYZ, but it would have never occurred to you until you actually went and started experimenting.
Yeah.
So speaking of that, like, I don't know, is there a new technology or something that you're exploring or interested? Because I kind of remember you always kind of playing with new things. Like I remember you were one of the first people I knew who played with the MyRio, and you were one of the first people talking about System Link and some other stuff when it came out.
That's interesting that you should say that. Although I just finished saying how you always need to learn something new, and that's a big part of the job. At the same time, I feel like I'm really cautious about investing in new things, and I'm really happy to take a job where there's some little new corner of it, but I know I can do it because I've done most of it before. So I don't know. I suspect you're right in a way, but
well, I think it's balancing the risks. Like I've seen you experiment with like the MyRio and all that, but I don't know that you've actually used that on a project, right? So that's like the balancing the risk is like checking it out to see what's out there and see what's possible.
I did have one project that used the MyRio.
Oh.
It's been a few years,
Cool.
But I played with the MyRio quite a bit. That's fun. And then I took off with the Serial and the FPGA stuff, because I just think that's an amazing platform. It has so much power and potential in it. So.
Yeah, I haven't done a whole lot with FPGA, but my understanding is LabVIEW FPGA is way easier than learning VHDL. I think my understanding is VHDL is super complicated. So
Yeah, that would be my guess too. I haven't tried to, so I can't say that from experience, but that's kind of my understanding.
but I did work on a project. And I was talking to Shane O'Neill. I don't know if you remember. I've met Shane. He's a LabVIEW champion. He's over in Europe somewhere in Switzerland. But I was talking to him recently, and we were talking about that. And basically, like the LabVIEW on FPGA lets you do a lot of stuff, and you have to learn VHDL. But at some point, you reach the limits of what the LabVIEW compiler can do on FPGA, and then you have to switch over to VHDL. And I know I was working on a project where that was the case.
Wow.
Where they were doing that, and yeah, that complicates things a lot. I didn't do any of the FPGA work on that. I called up Terry Strataticus and I said, Terry, you're the FPGA expert. You want to help me with this? And so, speaking to that spirit of collaboration, right?
Yeah.
Like knowing your boundaries and your limits, and I was just like, yeah, this is like way over my head. So,
wow.
Yeah.
I can imagine that happening. I think with my LabVIEW FPGA projects, I haven't hit that boundary, so I'm lucky that everything so far has fit. But I can certainly imagine where it could happen.
Well, if you ever need an FPGA expert, Terry's
Good to know.
the guy. Yeah, and he does consulting, so he'd be happy to hear from you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll have to get him on here sometime and interview him. He'd be an interesting guy to talk to.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there's lots of very interesting people in the LabVIEW world. So
yeah,
I don't think I'll run out of podcast guests anytime soon. So yeah, this is relevant to the podcast. So let's maybe. So I was thinking about like being an overnight success and putting the time in, and like it kind of struck me what you said about how it took you so long with Vicus X, like you said, over decades and stuff. And so, and I feel like right now I'm kind of reaping the fruits of that myself because, you know, I looked, I have like 300 blog posts over the past 7 years. So, nothing happens overnight, I guess.
No, I've been impressed by your efforts. I guess marketing efforts is kind of the idea, but you're always busy doing something, with blog posts or, interviews or emails or, creating content is not really that easy a thing to do, and to do it as regularly as you seem to do is impressive.
Yeah, I think it's that persistence, stubborn. I mean, I do run 100-mile races, so like there's like a little bit of persistence or stubbornness required for that. So maybe that just rubs off. Yeah, I can never determine between persistence and stubbornness, right? Like one has a negative connotation, and one is like you're overcoming something. The other one, you're just beating your head against the wall.
It's probably a combination.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it has to do with like, are you seeing results? Like, right? Because you don't want to keep repeating the same thing over and over again if you're not seeing any results. But if things are slowly moving along, then you keep
Yeah.
Somebody explained it once. It was in a book. It was like the flywheel. Like, you just push the flywheel a little bit, and like every little bit doesn't seem to do anything. But once the flywheel gets spinning, then it's like moving along.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's cool. So let's talk about times when the flywheel gets stuck or hits a bump or something. When you try something and it doesn't quite work out the way you expected. You were telling me in the break there a little bit about that project.
So yeah, Original Code is a really small company. It's me and Ted Anderson is my business partner. Has been for a few years now, and we had Davey as an intern. But so it's really small, and we're software, right? We do LabVIEW. But I had this bright idea a while ago for a sensor, and I still think it's a cool idea. And I didn't, I wasn't banking my retirement on it or anything. I don't think I was irresponsible, but it was definitely educational to try and create a physical product. We've done a few other I've got some circuit boards I sell for my own whatever.
Okay.
They're really, really easy, small things. And again, not gonna buy a yacht based on those products. But I put in a certain amount of effort and some thousands of dollars of paying other people to help me and buying hardware and stuff to try and make this basically an attitude sensor. Could be really useful for a couple of things, including drones, where they're flying drones in swarms. They have to know exactly where each one is, how they're positioned and what direction they're pointing and all these things. So having a really cheap attitude sensor would be very useful to them. And they have some really good attitude sensors that are not cheap. So and I'm sure that's changing all the time, and they're getting better and cheaper. But so I had an idea that I suspect could still be carried out if you were persistent enough or stubborn, depending on which one you want to use, as you were saying. And I actually had a lot of fun trying to make this, but it was educational to experience the difference between making a hardware product and a software product, and coming up against the inevitable challenges that you didn't foresee, because that you've got to expect that. You got to expect the unexpected, and it ultimately has not yet panned out, and I'm not sure it ever will, because we had a key piece of equipment that's too expensive for me to go and buy another one of, which ended up breaking. And so we kind of hit a dead end with this development, because I just don't, it was self-funded, and it was a fun project, but now the threshold in just dollars to make it go to the next step, got a lot higher, and so it's not obvious whether we'll ever resurrect that attempt or not.
So I'm curious, you talked about the different challenges between hardware and software. So what is the difference and challenge? Can you expand upon that?
Well, I don't know. This is probably too basic to be very intelligent or interesting, but it strikes me that hardware costs money and software costs time. So like I said, we had this key piece of test equipment. It was overkill for our project, but it worked really well. But it was literally, a $30,000 unit that we had on loan from another place, and it just went belly up. It's not our fault. It was really old. Nobody's worried about it, so it's not like I'm concerned about getting it back to them in working shape, because that wasn't part of the expectation. But replacing that with even something a lot cheaper would be, it's just a big threshold. You need to, I mean, we were doing it kind of as a hobby. Can we make this sensor? It looks like it's going to be pretty simple. It turns out not so simple, obviously, but as long as the threshold's in a few thousands of dollars here and there, I can keep doing it. And then when it goes up to tens of thousands, you have to make sure you're really serious about it. But anyway, the hardware versus software, I think it's just that with software, you beat your head against it, and you have to ask for tech support from someone, or help from somebody, or a friend who knows more about some software thing than you do. But to a certain extent, it's more time, and if you have extra time, you can spend more time. Whereas with hardware, you have to spend money to actually get the stuff.
Yeah. So in my experience, the only little bit of hardware I did was working at Westinghouse. I designed a few circuit boards, and I think one of the things I noticed was the iteration time and turnaround time. Right? You got to send out the boards, and then also like that cost, because running one board is very expensive versus running like a whole sheet of them.
Yeah.
And then the other part is the malleability part. Like software is like infinitely tweakable.
Yeah.
Or you just go in, you change a few INI file entries or whatever. When you get a circuit board back and it doesn't work, then you're like cutting traces and adding jumpers and things like that. And it gets to be really complicated really quick.
Yeah.
So
that's true. And that's kind of been one of my guiding philosophies in the whole consulting world is that I try and dump everything into the software and avoid, building custom hardware just because of that. And other people try and go the other route. And I'd like, let's just get a C-RIO, because we can do all this in the C-RIO, and then I can change the C-RIO software when you need something new. You don't have to build a new circuit board.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like that approach. What I've found is actually in some cases the opposite. People trying to do stuff in software that they should be doing in hardware, like some of the anti-aliasing filters and stuff, and like, oh, we'll just sample at some rate and then we'll do something else in the software that just doesn't really work. Right? Like if you've got noise problems, like the noise problems are probably better addressed in the hardware by adding some kind of filter.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to like filter them out in the software space. In general, that tends to be my experience.
No, I think that's really true. It's always a balancing act, and so the real key is to know where to put the balance in any given situation. But I think your example is really true, right? Noise. Your number one approach to noise is to hit it at the source.
Yep.
But it's fun because in software, if they just won't do that or can't do that or whatever, then you can still play a lot of software games and try and ameliorate this situation.
Yeah, and adding new features is often a lot easier in software. But that's why I like the approach of like getting a CREO. The other thing is like the signal conditioning. Like I know lots of people will like go out of their way to try to design circuit boards to do signal conditioning and stuff. And I'm a big fan of just get the CREO module that does it all for you, right? And you wire the signal right in, as opposed to like, oh, we got this signal and we got to add all these relay boards and all this extra hardware and custom design stuff. It's like, nah.
Yeah.
Buy the conditioning hardware directly from NI and plug into the CREO chassis and be done with it. Yeah.
I like that approach. It doesn't always fit every situation, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. Cool. Yeah, the wood project we were going to work on had a bit of that, didn't it? The rock crushing thing, because they were doing a bunch of stuff and they had the PID loops and some other stuff that was implemented in hardware that probably could have been done in software.
Yeah, right. The fellow had had his own idea, which is fine because he was leading the project.
Yeah, it was
he had
his
his
project.
own ideas of what
like
to put in hardware and what to put in software. But that's another thing besides the noise example you gave. The other place where it's really important to put it in hardware is the safety circuitry, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like if you've got a shutoff or something like, it's okay to have a button on the software screen that does it, but you should have a manual shutoff and it should actually like cut the power to stuff directly and not like, oh, the software has to detect that you press the button and then turn the power off. Like that's just, that's asking for trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in some places you probably can't legally get away with that either.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are two places, the noise issues and the grounding and noise issues and the emergency stop definitely need to be hardware.
Stops. Yep.
Yeah, but also too stops on like motors and stuff too. Like I much prefer a hard physical limit switch than a software limit.
Yeah.
So, because you get out of calibration or something, or you get your steps per revolution or something are off, and next thing you know you're running into things, and definitely had those problems.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's an interesting. That's one of the things I think that makes LabVIEW programmers unique from web programmers and other types of programmers, because we interact with the real world, so you have to have some idea of the physics of what's going on. You have to have some idea of like the signals and how they interact and the hardware side of it.
Yeah, the electronics. I totally agree. That's why I'm in this world. Is because it's the interface. It's the combination of knowing both the hardware and the software.
That's both the blessing and a bane in some ways, right? So it's nice in that like it limits the number of people who make good LabVIEW programmers, because they kind of have to have both of those worlds. But often we're weak on the software side, I think.
Yeah.
Because the mantra is find somebody who already understands the physics, and it's easier to teach them programming than it is to teach a programmer physics.
Well, that's the whole point of LabVIEW too, right? Yeah. Anyone can do it.
Yeah, and I didn't really help us with the marketing of like, programming optional and all that. And I mean, that works for really small things. The problem is some of these things end up becoming these big software systems. And at that point, having a little software engineering background can be quite helpful.
Yeah.
So knowing how to use some of the tools and things like that. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's kind of been part of my focus. And it's part of the focus of the podcast is hopefully I'll be able to bring in some guests from outside of the LabVIEW world to kind of show us how they do things in other languages, which is, you mentioned the whole thing about learning. I like looking at other programming languages and just kind of seeing how they tackle certain challenges. They don't always apply to LabVIEW. So LabVIEW's bane, one of its banes is that the graphical nature and the fact that it's like binary files and it's hard to use a lot of the tools that are out there. But the ideas and principles still carry over.
Yeah.
So if you can understand those, then So
definitely.
It's really good. Cool. What else we got to talk about? We got a few more minutes.
Well, we could go into OOP if you want.
Yeah. No, actually. So this is actually a really good topic, because I think I was around when you were trying to learn it because I remember you asking me lots of questions.
Oh yeah.
So yeah,
Oh,
you
you
want to talk
helped.
about
You
that?
helped a lot at that point, and it took me years. I mean, Nancy would present OOP over and over at user groups and events and things, and we did these exercises. And I understand the concept, and that's great. But you gotta do your own project, and you gotta dive in and do it before you really get it. And so it just took me a long time to do that. And when I did, you were there, so that was really great.
Yeah, the cats and dogs and shapes and cars only do so much.
That's right.
At some point, you gotta like look at a real world example.
Right, and then once you do get into it and you start using it in software, then there's so many levels of higher concepts that I'm still not an expert on at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did a project without OOP a long time ago. It was kind of this generic instrument interface kind of thing that read serial ports and UDP ports and whatever. And I presented it at an alarm meeting, and Nancy said, "Oh, that'd be great in OOP." And it took me about 10 years, but that's the one that you helped me with.
Yep, I remember that.
I actually did it in OOP, and that is my big success with OOP. And I'm probably going to sound like a broken record if anybody knows me very well, but my philosophy of OOP in LabVIEW is that it's really great and it's really powerful, and it's an amazing tool that can be well used in certain situations, and it's really oversold.
So I had this comment the last time I did one of these that OOP, so OOP stands for object-oriented programming for anybody listening, but OOP is like salt, all right? A little bit adds a lot of flavor. A little bit adds a lot of flavor, but you can easily overdo it. So that
may be a good philosophy. That's not the same point that I was trying to make, which is, in my opinion, and NI pushes OOP too hard. At a certain point in LabVIEW's history, it suddenly became the status quo was you have to learn OOP and you have to do everything in OOP. And I just don't think that's appropriate. And maybe the reason I feel like that is because it's not necessarily appropriate in a lot of the projects I do. And maybe the reason they do that is because it is appropriate to a lot of projects. So I'm not saying that, it's partly my perspective on things. It's not, I'm not saying that all the fault lies with NI, but in my world, OOP is oversold because it's easy to apply in a situation where you really don't need it. One of my guiding principles is you can do a ton of stuff with a regular LabVIEW. If you're careful and you structure things well, you don't need OOP to do some really amazing programming and big projects and solid projects. And I've actually had a bunch of consulting jobs, a few, I shouldn't say a bunch, but a number of consulting jobs where I de-OOPed a project that somebody else had written and kind of mucked up, and done a poor job of putting OOP in there. And the people at the company didn't really want OOP because they don't know it. And so I refactored them and took OOP out. And so, I think OOP's great when you have a team who knows it and really understands it and can do it. And then, there's fantastic, dynamic dispatch. Whoa. I mean, that is just the most amazing tool. And that's only scratching the surface of what OOP can do. But, forcing it into groups where, they hardly know LabVIEW, let alone OOP, it just adds obfuscation. It's a negative, in my opinion, in certain situation.
So I think you hit on a very important topic, and I think the thoughts to leave people with is that choosing the correct design pattern, the correct framework, the correct structure for your code, it's all context dependent. And so a lot of it has to do with, what makes sense in your context, and it might not be what makes sense in another person's context.
Yeah.
Because I struggle with this with Actor Framework because, I do a lot of small and medium projects and I don't really see a need for Actor Framework.
Yeah.
And yet there are people who do really huge projects who love actor framework and it works really well for them. So like there must be something about their context that's different from mine that I'm just not seeing and making that connection. So
yeah, I think that's it.
Cool. All right, I think we're about done. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me, Dave. I hope this has been fun and enjoyable.
Definitely, Sam. Thanks for bringing me on, and it's always a pleasure to chat with you.
All right, thank you very much. That's it for today's episode of the LabVIEW Experiment. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments or questions, head over to thelabviewexperiment.com and drop me a note. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at @TheLVExperiment so you never miss an episode. And remember, small steps and quick feedback are all you need. Catch you next time.